All right, everybody, welcome. Welcome to Follow Up Boss office hours. We're going to be talking about Follow Up Boss action plans and how to trigger them today. Super excited to be here with DeForest Williamson. How are you, DeForest?
I'm doing well. How are you, Lee?
Good. I'm really good. Really excited to dive in. Before we do that, why don't you give a little intro, what you do at Follow Up Boss, maybe a little what you did before, and then we'll dive into the session.
Sure, of course. So I'm a customer success manager, obviously, at Follow Up Boss. So I onboard teams typically between 3 and 10 agents, basically getting them ramped up as quickly as possible in Follow Up Boss. And then prior to that, I've been in customer success for a while, but have had the same role at other companies before.
Cool.
So mhm.
Awesome. I love it. So, but you found your home now. We're going to keep you. We're
Yeah.
going to keep you for a while.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Love it. So let's go ahead and dive in. Before we share screens, what is, at a high level, like what is an action plan? I think a lot of people probably know, but just let's begin at the beginning. What is an action plan and why would we want to use them?
Yeah. So my personal definition for an action plan, I like to call it basically, it can be a workflow or it can be our version of drip campaigns. So a lot of people will call it our version of drip campaigns. The reason I like to call it a workflow though is because it can be used for so many other things beyond just a drip campaign. So you can call it either a drip campaign or a workflow, like either one works.
I
And
love that. I just wrote that down. I'm totally stealing that from you because you're right. And they're different lanes, in some
yeah,
sense. One is a email drip on the consumer, and one could be changing stages, tasks for follow up or TC or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so that's why I like to use that because it can be both. That's why we call them action plans.
Right. That's
Yep.
right. Yeah, I love that. And it's funny. I really love that term, though. I think that really makes sense. And I think people do, as a whole, think of them more as drips. I think that's kind of the, you
Yes,
know,
very much. Yep, very much so. I
that's great.
think, yeah, the reason I emphasize that is because I feel like it's kind of an understated or undervalued part of action plans. And so many people are like, oh, drip campaigns. And I'm like, you could automate so many processes
Right.
and save yourself so much time with actually having it just internal instead of just being like, oh, just your regular email drip campaign, which is
Right.
still good.
Right.
Like,
Well, in the old days, in the really old days of Follow Up Boss, we really leaned into action plans for tasks. I mean, we didn't even smart lists were not dynamic. They had smart lists, but it was just like a set, lead
right.
with this tag or whatever. It was real basic. Um, so we get into that a lot where people have a bunch of tasks in their plans and all that. So we'll cover more of that today. Let's go ahead. I think it'll be better to talk about how to trigger them while we're in the product. So let's go ahead and screen share. And how do you want to start? Do you want to just build a quick, simple action plan, or what's
Yeah, like let's just go ahead and do that and just
do it?
dive right on in. So when you come into the account, you'll find this under admin and then you go to action plans. This is where it is. And we got nobody ever has to start from scratch. I feel like I always want to say that first because one of the biggest questions that I get from teams that reach out to me is like, oh my gosh, do we have to build everything? We have an action plan library, and I'm not going to click on that because I don't want to overwhelm people, but there are literally thousands of things in there.
Yeah.
So you could literally spend a whole day if you wanted to in there and stuff. So if you don't want to build from scratch, you do not have to. But if you were, you could come over here to action plan and it's really straightforward. So because I just talked about like setting up, we'll do drip campaigns first just because that's so common. So like if you wanted this to be a nurture or whatever, you could call this nurture test. And you can start with a text message if you want to. Typically though, like I just dive straight into setting up the email. So
And I
this,
think people know this, but let's just mention real quick that the text message only fires on a new contact as they initially come into Follow Boss. So you can put all the text you want in. I mean, I thought I was brilliant. I was like, I'm just going to make one action plan for every text and crack the code. It doesn't work that way. Just new
not at
leads,
all.
just saying.
Exactly. So like you can have one text for a new lead at the beginning of an action plan. That is it. There's no tricky ways to do drip text in here.
Right.
Yeah, you can't do that in Follow Boss. But yeah, you can set up a text in here and say thanks for reaching out, whatever you want. And then if you want to immediately after that, you can start setting up the drip. So this section right here, this tells you when you want this step to go after the previous one. So if you want this to run immediately after you've sent that text, you can. If you want it to be delayed by a day or whatever, you totally can. And then you're just going to come in here, say what you want the system to actually do. If you're setting up a drip, you're going to say send an email. And then you're going to come down here and you can either write a template if you want to, but more than likely you already have an email template that you've pulled into Follow Up Boss. So you're probably going to pull this from an email template that you already have in there. So I'm just going to say, let's see if there's not already any notes.
Wow, I don't know how there's not. That's crazy.
But I'm just going to choose this first one.
Yeah, we go with a new lead. Those are
Yep. Yep.
And I did just drop a quick link, by the way. There is a Follow Up Boss article that does have some like, use this plan, use this plan, use this plan. So if you're really looking for an easy button, I just dropped you an article to do that. Otherwise, we're going to show you how to do some cool stuff.
Awesome. So you can choose your email template right there. And then all you're doing is just adding steps. So you can add as many as you want. It will automatically be from whoever the agent is assigned to the lead. If you wanted to change that, though, you can. Like you can choose a specific person or lender or whoever. But otherwise, you're just adding steps. So then if you want to send the next email 2 days later, just say you want to send another email 2 days later and choose your next email template. So in this case, I'm going to, oh, there they are. I was in the wrong section. So in this case, I'm just going to say number 2. Going to add another step, and we're just going to say 5 days later. Number 3, etc. Okay. So that's what it'll look like. You can add as many steps as you want, and then you're just going to come up here and save it. And it'll be under your My Action Plans once you've saved it. So if you scroll down here, there's a lot in here. But if you scroll down, where's my nurture one? There it is. So there's the one that I just created, and you can click on it and see what all's in there. And you could read the emails, etc.
Awesome. Love it. Let's talk briefly, since we have it up, about the checkbox in the templates. If you're using this with a team or with other people, each template has this little checkbox at the bottom that says share with my team.
Yes.
It's super important that that is checked. Otherwise, the action plan won't be able to fire. The email template won't be able to fire.
Correct.
From that user. So I found that the other day in somebody's account I was going through, and I was like, wait, you've got some emails here, but they are not shared or they're deleted. So they're not actually going out. So,
right. So when you create an email template, and that's actually a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's this box right here. So as you're copying and pasting things over, make sure you click that or else it won't go out. Okay. You can, of course, have private templates if you're just doing a one-off email or you're sending a newsletter and you don't need to click it because you don't need to share it with your team. That's fine. But anything action plan related, this needs to be checked so that they can actually use it. Okay. So good point. Now, also in action plans, another thing that I think is typically really underestimated, that's how you set up a drip campaign. But an action plan, like I said earlier, can also be a workflow. So it doesn't need to be customer facing at all. It can be like a completely automated process just internally for the team. So if you come over here, and typically I feel like this comes up a lot when people are closing deals, for example, when you go under contract, typically you're doing kind of the same thing. You're going through the same exact administrative process. So you can come over here and say, hey, this is a task list that I want to set up. And then you can just come down here and have a series of tasks that pop up automatically. I like to just add a bunch of steps beforehand if this is a task list, and then just plug in what I want my task to be. So like scheduling an inspection, sending a contract, for example, maybe getting some photos taken, all of this stuff that like usually you're going through the same exact thing every single time, typically once you have a deal going. So this may be something your admin do or set up or whatever, but it's just helpful to automatically have that go out. So you're not manually doing the same exact thing over and over and over again. Instead, you're just like saying like, what you actually need to do. So I'm just putting random stuff in here now.
That's great. But I love the assignment thing, especially for the TC example, because maybe the admin does this thing, but the agent puts the sign in the yard, but the admin needs to put the listing in the MLS, like whatever those things are. So it's really cool that you can assign them to different people there.
Mhm.
But assigned agent is the default, and generally that's what you would probably want, especially sending an email. But who knows? You can do whatever you want. If you want to have a lender have a task to follow up on a certain lead that comes in 3 days later, then you can do all that.
Yeah, so then you would just save it. And then when this runs, because I had those all set to immediately run at 0, that entire task list will pop into whatever lead profile is relevant at the same time. So then whoever's assigned to it, they can just go through and start checking things off. So I mean, if I were to go into like a random person in here and manually run that action plan, let's just go to, I'm forgetting what I called it that quick, but
Oh yeah.
yep, there it is. So all of these will pop in at the same time. Okay. And then you can come in here and just start checking things off once you've got it done. Pretty straightforward. So that's an
And
action. Yeah.
and a quick note too, you can also still edit them.
Yeah.
Some people are concerned about like, oh, well, we don't know what day the contingency's up or the inspection's up or whatever. So one best practice some people will do is dump all these tasks in here. Just don't have to type them all out, but you can still edit them after they're applied. So you could say, oh, well, really the plumber needs to go on the 22nd or whatever. So
Right.
you can still modify them is our point. Like you can get them
Right.
pushed in, but still modify
Right.
them.
Exactly. Exactly. And those, another thing that I didn't say, these will also, they'll show up here in the task list, but they'll also show up on your calendar. Personally, I live on my calendar. I do not look at my task list just because of we use Follow Up Boss internally. And I just look at that. So I see everything I need to do on my calendar. So if there's anybody out there who's more of a calendar person, that will show up on your calendar. Just make sure your email is connected. That is the only caveat to that. And you can just live on your calendar. Same thing applies for appointments while we're on that topic too.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, good mention. Let's take a quick look, if you don't mind, on the workflow list, the task list, and some of the other steps like changing stages, adding a tag, removing a tag, starting a action plan. Like there really is a lot you can do. And again, I really like you differentiating the drips from the internal. Now, to be clear to people, you can have all those things in one plan. It probably doesn't make sense to, but like
Yeah, you can. You
you don't
can.
have to differentiate them. But usually for people's brains too, it's better to be like, this one drips on the client and this one tells us, what we need to do.
Yeah. If you wanted to, you could totally send an email and then 5 days later have a task assigned to yourself if you wanted to. You could totally do that. There's no rule that says you can't. But like Lee said, typically, just for organizational purposes and for things to not get messy or confusing, it's best to have them.
You don't want to have to research which plan, what thing came from when you need to change it or
Right.
whatever. So keep it simple.
Yep, exactly. But these are all of the different things. You can totally do pretty much anything in here. So pretty much I would say anything that you want to automate, you're starting in action plans for the most part, 99% of the time. You're going to come over in action plans and you're just going to tell the system, what do you want it to do? Do you want it to change the stage? Okay, then tell it what stage you want it to change it to. And you come in here, you change the stage and you put what stage you want to change it to. Maybe you want to add a note. Maybe you want to add a tag. That's another popular one. I really like tags. So you can automatically add a tag in the system. And fun fact, you can also start a second action plan automatically if you have that as the last step in there. So if you want it to like just add, it can be any tag. So you wanted to add a tag. Adding that tag could be the trigger if you dive into automations, which is a whole nother topic, but you could trigger another action plan by adding that tag. So, which is pretty cool. So,
Absolutely. In fact, sometimes what I'll do just to future proof stuff, even if we're not doing that,
mhm,
I like to add a tag or a task, usually a tag, at the end of the plan that
mhm,
just says like buyer nurture complete or whatever that is. Because to your point, you're kind of future proofing it. Like maybe right now you don't want to run an action plan on that. But if you build that into this action plan where it says like buyer action plan complete, that could in the future trigger, oh, now let's put them on a long-term nurture, or let's
yep,
add them to our newsletter, or let's change the stage to unresponsive, or whatever those things are.
yep,
But yeah, it's just a good practice to have it for a number of reasons. So I like to just end every action plan with some sort of like This is
Yeah.
done. This happened, or they didn't convert, or whatever.
Yep. It's also good just because, I mean, this is kind of going off into tags, but you click that tag and it shows you everybody who has that tag all at once. So anything that you need to do in bulk, maybe you're just brainstorming what type of action plan you want to send out. Tags is awesome because you can easily find people. You don't need to really manually do anything. I
Right.
admit I'm totally lazy. I love just clicking on tags.
Right. Yeah. Show me everyone who's had buyer action plan complete
Right.
ever.
Yeah,
And let's
exactly.
send them a batch email of, hey, we have a new valuation tool or whatever,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So
Love it.
tags is great. And I think I would say that's one of the most popular ones. In addition, like when you're not setting up drips, I feel like adding a tag is like the biggest thing that people want to do
Yeah.
within an
I think
action.
that remove all tags is new. That terrifies me because I'm so all about tags. The thought of removing tags like blindly from a contact is
Yep. I mean, that's
like,
kind of the same thing. It's funny you bring that up. This definitely also scares me, but also this option up here, it is checked by default on purpose, I might add. But you automatically pause this action plan when the lead responds, meaning that any automated messages, like it completely stops if a lead responds to a previous, like either an email or the text you sent out, whatever, it pauses the action plan because you don't want automated stuff to keep going out when they've responded to you, right? Every now and then I'll get a team be like, oh, can we just uncheck that? And I'm like, do you
are you
really want to do
sure?
that? So,
Yeah.
but I
But
mean,
it depends on what you're doing, right? Like if it's
yeah,
somebody you've talked to and you are nurturing them, then you wouldn't want that box checked because
right.
and I mentioned this in a recent session, and it probably makes me sound even older than I actually am. But in the old version of Fault Boss, there was literally a button that said contacted or not contacted, and that kind of drove this. It still worked the same way, but you could just see if they were contacted or not contacted. But yeah, if
Mhm.
you're doing a long-term nurture for people you've already talked to, you don't want that box checked.
Right.
If you're doing something to get engagement, most likely like a new lead flow type
Right.
thing, that's where you want it to stop because you don't want to send them an email in 3 days. It's like, hey, it's been a while, and you're like, I just talked to you 2 days ago.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to look bad like that. So
Right.
your nurture leads are like the one exception, like Lead said to that. But otherwise, like it's checked automatically for a reason.
The
So
other thing that's really powerful about it, and then I'll get off my soapbox for it. The other thing that's really powerful about it, if you're using that checked in a new lead plan, adding something at the end, and it could be a tag or just the stage change, makes it easy to say, hey, look, we're going to follow up with this lead for 20 days. And if after 20 days they've never responded, change the stage to
right.
nurture or unresponsive or whatever. So it's a great way to do that because every time I go into everybody's account, they have 20,000 people in lead, and I'm like, that's not how it works. Um, so that's
Yeah.
a cool tip that you can use with these.
Yeah. I would also say, since you brought up stages, and by the way, stage, you can automatically change the stage like he just mentioned right there. But having all of the leads organized by the right stage is key to your entire database and action plans. If you do not have them in the right stage, everything else in your database is going to be disorganized strictly from that stage not being correct. So every single stage that you have in your database, you should have an internal process for that stage. You should know exactly what the stage means, and you should know exactly what you need to be doing with leads in that stage, including action plans. So you should know exactly, that should dictate exactly when this action plan starts. If not with automations, at least internally, you should know exactly what you need to be doing when somebody is in that right stage. So,
Absolutely. Yeah,
so
I'm a big fan of that too. I try to say that every session in some way, shape, or form. So
yes, yes. So just
awesome.
yeah,
Beautiful. So now we've got an action plan, whether you take one from the library. And by the way, you can also modify the ones from the library. In fact, you should. Most of
yes,
them have some
yes.
sort of like,
They're
thanks,
customized.
Bob
Yes, you need
Remax.
to.
It's like, no, you're going to want to edit that a little bit.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but once you got your plan, like that's awesome and good, except making a plan doesn't do anything. So how do we make these plans do stuff?
Great question. So there are two different things that you can do. So you would come over, well, actually three different things. What am I saying? You can come over here to lead flow. Lead flow, this is where you can actually manage all new leads coming into your system. So any action plan that you build, if you want it to go out automatically when a new lead comes in, you can actually come over here to action plan and you can add that action plan to that section so that every time somebody new comes in, whatever is in that action plan, whether it's an email, whether it's a text message, whatever, goes out automatically immediately as soon as they hit your system. So that's one way for all new leads. The second way you can do that is actually with automations. Now, this is with leads that are already in your database. This is for existing leads. So if anybody is already in your database, what you can do is you can add an automation on top of that action plan so that it'll start going out to those leads. Now, just to be clear, because people always tend to get confused between the difference between those two, an automation is like a trigger. That's all it is. It is just a trigger. You cannot trigger something that does not exist. So you always need to start with action plans before you start getting too excited about automations. Okay. So once you have it built, then you're just adding a trigger on top of it. So whether it's the tag being added, and I'm just going to say, so if you add a tag to this, let's just say buyer, for example. So when this tag is added, I want to automatically trigger this action plan. And then you can come up here and trigger the action plan so it'll go out. So if you were to save this and turn it on after naming it, every single time you added this tag to a lead profile, that nurture action plan would start automatically every time. You wouldn't need to do anything. Those emails, whatever was in that action plan, would start going out. And then finally, the last way, of course, that you can do something is say you've got a really specific lead who is in a particular situation and you want to start something manually that's like custom for them. You can come over here manually and start an action plan, of course, as well. So you would just come over here. I typically like typing to search for it, but you can scroll through all these if you want to. But you can come over here, click on whatever the action plan is, and then just activate that plan so that it'll start going out to that individual.
Awesome. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can't forget that. I mean, you don't always necessarily want to rely on agents to do
right,
that. And
right.
one, I love the example you gave, and I want to lean into that. And I know this, to me, this seems a little bit silly, but it works. I've definitely set up stuff for people where if they apply that tag, it starts the action plan. Yes, in theory, they can go over and click like you just showed.
Yep,
I think we all know for whatever reason, like people are really well trained to do certain things on the left-hand side.
yep,
And so if you needed an easy button for like, oh, the other thing that you could easily do, maybe we'll show this too. You could do an automation for a stage change
yep, you could.
to
Yep,
power that action plan. So everybody that gets moved to nurture could start, yeah, or spoke, what, yeah, any example,
anything,
great.
anything. Yep, doesn't matter. You get moved to that nurture plan. So
So
then
that,
as soon
yeah,
as you choose the stage to nurture, like then that action plan would start automatically. And I think this is actually one of the most popular setups for nurture in particular, because I feel like those are the hardest leads for agents and people to actually work. So this is very, very powerful for your nurture leads, since we just use that as an example in particular. So
I do want, this is always the first question everybody has. Automations do not fire in bulk. You can't do this as a way to go in and add a nurture tag or change the stage with 5,000 people and have them kick off a plan. But again, there's a reason we don't do that. But so I just want to mention that at a high level, like this is not an easy button to put 5,000 people in an action plan. But by the same token, you don't want an action plan going to 5,000 people, same email, same time. You're going to get a bunch of responses. Like it's better to do 5 a day and have them interspersed a little bit instead of like, oh
yeah,
no, why is everyone replying to the did I drop the ball email today?
yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it like logistically. If you sent that out to 5,000 people and only 2,500 responded, do you seriously want to respond to
Right.
like 2,500 emails?
Right.
No.
And unless they're really warm leads or sphere, you're probably going to start to get in trouble if you're doing it in bulk anyway. That's kind of
That's a whole
the
nother
whole
topic.
point. That's right. That's another
That's a
webinar.
whole, like whole nother topic right there.
Right, for sure. Well, and I do want to show real quick the condition. So like in this example, if you had a team and say, for example, you'd want people's sphere leads to get dripped on, you
Mhm.
could put in a condition, say something like source equals, is or is not Zillow or Agent Sphere or whatever it would be. And this would be most likely either an exception or the rule to with which things would continue. So if you're like, hey, when we change the stage to nurture on my personal contacts, I don't want them to get dripped on, you could add
Mhm.
an exclusion or an inclusion there to.
Yeah, exactly. Or if you were reaching out to past clients in particular, like say you were sending a birthday email or something like that, you could say, hey, if the email is good, if the phone number is good, you can add all sorts of conditions in here. Or maybe you have one plan for people at a particular price point.
Right.
So that's another thing. You could send it to people who are at this particular price point, and then you could send a different one for people at a different price point. So totally up to you. There's a bunch of conditions you could come in here to
Yeah.
leverage if you wanted to. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want. That's what I
Yep.
like.
Yeah, no, it is great. And I'll give a funny example I just did with somebody. I had a team where the agents were trashing leads they shouldn't have been.
Oh,
And
that's all.
so we sent that never happens. And at least they changed the stage, right? But um, so I made an automation for them that said when the stage is changed to trash, but what I learned very quickly is I needed one of the admins to be able to trash leads. And like then no one could trash leads with my automation. So I had to come in and out of condition to exclude her. Like if the lead is assigned to her, she can trash it, but nobody else can
Yep.
trash leads in this account. So
Yep. Every now and then you gotta put those guardrails up.
yeah, there's all kinds of use cases. And we mentioned this a little bit in the tasks, but similar with the automations, name it well, like help your future self know what this nurture stage change applies, nurture play, like
Yeah.
don't
Be
make it like
specific.
plan
Don't
number two.
exactly. Yeah, be specific. And a lot of times, like you may, if you forget to put it in here, like you need to title it something just so that you could easily find it. Okay. So definitely remember to do that. Like, and make it obvious. You don't want to waste a bunch of time overthinking things when you're in the system. So,
And it does, and you referenced this earlier, but it does get complex, right? As you build these over time, as you're like, ooh, I'm gonna do a nurture one, now I'm gonna do a new lead one, now I'm gonna do a past client one, now I'm gonna do
yep.
whatever. It does get confusing and wires do get crossed. So it is
Yep.
name them well, have an overall strategy. We've done plenty of webinars on that, have
Yep.
a overall strategy.
Yeah. And I would say try to be as specific as possible as to what outcome you're actually trying to achieve. Because if I'm like I've talked to hundreds of teams at this point and they're like, we don't really want to know what our goal, we don't know what we want to do this quarter. We don't know. I'm like, okay, you need to have that conversation.
Start there.
You need to have that conversation internally as a team because you can do like 50,000 different things in the system
Right.
with all different results. So you need to actually have a focus on what you're actually trying to achieve and then build out according to that goal so that it actually makes sense. Okay. You can't just come in here. This is another really popular question. Like, what action plans does this team have? I don't know how many times I get that question. And I'm like, his goal is completely different from yours. It has no relevance to
Right.
what you're trying to do. That's
Right.
so
Different market with a different price
different,
point and
it's
different
like
brokerage, and you're a team or you're a solo agent or whatever.
right. So I mean, that's another. I get that pretty much almost all the time with
Yeah.
like every new team. They're like, "What's
Oh,
so
I
and
do
so?"
too. I live in that world. What does everybody else do? I'm like, well, theirs is different. That's why we customize it for you. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And I would advise people if this is all brand new to you, and I want to get your take on this too, DeForest, like if this is all brand new to you, or if you're just kind of stock setup, personally, for my brain, I like to work chronologically. So like let's start in the lead flow. Let's start with a new lead coming in, and then we can work on maybe a nurture plan or a past client plan. But I know just again, for me personally, this may or may not be your thing, but like just find a way where it makes sense to kind of eat the elephant. Don't try to
Mhm.
write 7 action plans at one time because it's going to be confusing. Do the new lead, new lead buyer, new lead seller, nurture
Yep.
buyer, nurture seller, long-term nurture buyer, long-term nurture seller, and then, forever unresponsive drip or whatever. Like that would cover all the bases.
Yep. Yep. I would definitely strongly agree with that. For two reasons. Number one, for your past clients and those people, those are people you've already worked with. More than likely, you already know them.
Right.
I
Should be
don't
different
recommend,
messaging, not like,
yeah,
hey, we haven't talked in
yeah,
a while.
different messaging. And honestly, those are like, that's your gold mine. You don't want to use those people as guinea pigs.
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's maybe a family member who doesn't care, okay, fine. But if
Right.
it's like, if otherwise, you don't really want those people to be your guinea pig. So after you've done a few test runs on like new leads coming in, I totally agree. That's when you should definitely be starting at that point. I always say try to sell something to somebody today. That will automatically teach you the system, how the system works, but it'll also just automatically prompt you on what you want to build, on how you want to actually engage with that client, and get them excited for next steps and all of that to keep them working with you. So, like starting with lead flow, if you're brand new, making sure you're updating the stage. Because again, this all starts, we're talking about action plans, but this all starts with stages and following up with your client. If you're not doing those two things, you need to start there before you dive into action plans.
Yeah.
Okay. Because like I said, that dictates the rest of your database. So knowing what stage they're in, knowing where you should move them next, that will dictate what type of action plan you need to have for them. So yeah,
Right.
definitely starting here under lead flow or with new leads if you're manually adding them is the way to go.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yep.
that's such a good point. I could not agree with that more. So, two last quick things to kind of wrap us up, and we just had a question kind of about this, so it actually lines up nicely. I referenced the earlier, like you can't do this on 5,000 contacts, nor should you, but
Right.
there is obviously a batch email feature in Fault Boss. So I want to touch on that for a second because I think it's super important to differentiate a mass bulk email and or a newsletter, which was more tied to the question. We'll cover that a little bit, and I can shoot you some additional
Yeah.
info too there. But like to me, it's also magical to still send out some bulk messaging to certain people at certain times, maybe
Right.
more so than an action plan. Like you can't use an action plan to say like we've got a client event coming in August because you don't
Right.
know when it's going to go out. But a
Right.
batch email, you could say, hey, we've got a client of this, click here to RSVP or click here to do something. So
Right.
don't want to get deep in the details of that, but any other thoughts kind of DeForest too on just the use of the two kind of in tandem?
Yeah, I love, this is part of the reason why I love tags, because if you click on that tag and that shows you everybody in your database, particularly for things like events, anything in person for the most part, I love, like I tag for that.
Yep.
And the reason for that is more than likely at some point you're going to be wanting to make an announcement or a quick email about that. When you click on that tag and that takes you to that list, you select everyone and send everyone a batch email. Those are the best times when it's appropriate for that to get people to come to that event, obviously. So that's definitely, and then on the flip side of that, you can still be nurturing people with an action plan as they go along. But having a batch email is super valuable, especially for events or newsletters. So anything like newsletters or things like that, or one-off emails, that's the best case scenario for those batch emails to be sent. So yeah, I would totally recommend leveraging those two
Yep.
to be sending those for those emails.
Yeah, I just think people need to think about both in their strategy. Like I'm a big fan of having a newsletter.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I think it's super wise, but again, it's more of an HTML. It's more of a pretty like people
Right,
know it's not a personal email to them. It's an
right,
update. So having
exactly.
a good combination of both uh,
Right,
is really
exactly.
smart.
And also, like, if you think about, or at least any decent newsletter, I'll say, it's not the same exact carbon email every
Right.
single month, or I would say it shouldn't
It
be.
shouldn't be right.
It should
Right.
not be. So
Want
that's
an
not
easy
going,
button, but don't
yeah,
send them the same thing every week. There, it's not gonna.
right. Exactly. So that's not going to work within an action plan, because if you were sending that within an action plan, that would mean you would need to go into the action plan and like rewrite it every single month when you're
Right.
sending that nurture email. Who wants to do that? Instead, you would just select everyone and send them whatever your content is
Right.
for that. So that's a, like, that's
And
a,
as much as you can't start action plans in bulk, you can't really stop them in bulk either, short of deleting the plan. So again, be careful what you're getting yourself into. Don't put 1 million people on action plans and be like, oh shoot, we want to stop that plan and do something. It's not designed to pound on people. It's just not.
right. Yes.
Um, but I do want to mention we have a few questions about it. I knew we would once we went there, and I took us a little off topic, but I thought it was relevant. Number one, as long as you're sending one batch email, it will not do multiple sends to a person. So if you're selecting, to your point, DeForest, if you're selecting different tags and whatever, and if somehow people have 3 of those tags, they're not going to get it 3 times, as long as it's a single batch email you're sending. If you send one batch email to one tag and one batch email to another tag and one batch email to another
Right.
tag, it
Yeah.
will.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, but you kind of reference this, DeForest, and I'll just say it a different way for people too. An easy thing you can do is use your filters to find those tags, and then maybe add a tag that's like newsletter. Like for our company, we power our newsletter with a newsletter tag. Like we have a tag, they're on our newsletter. We take it off, they're off. So you might use the multiple data to find the people, but it's more simple to have a singular tag. So
Right.
again, maybe research that, get a singular tag, send a single batch email, and you won't get duplicates or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Somebody asked, can you show real quick, because I know I kind of took us in the weeds on this. Can you show real quick how to like select a tag and then send a batch to everybody on that tag?
Yeah. So like, I'm
Just
just
because I opened up the can of worms, and then we'll go into reporting real quick, and then we'll jump.
yeah. So if you're in like a random profile and you see this person has 3 different tags, if I click on this tag right here, it takes me to all 3 people right there who have that specific tag on their profile. It doesn't just take me to Joey who had that tag on there. So once you've added a tag, like regardless of what tag it is, so like if I click on seller, for example, there's 5 people. You'll notice now there's more people because 5 people have that particular tag. So that's how you do that.
Yep. And go ahead and show actually just to select them and hit the batch email button, because I think the question really was like, how do you do this at all?
Yep. So you select everybody by clicking this box next to name and then clicking batch email. And then that will put in your subject, put in your template, which you can do by just selecting the template right there and then previewing it and send away.
Awesome. Love
That's
it.
it. Just 2 clicks.
Let's do this before we wrap. I didn't even have this on our notes. Let's take a quick look at action plan reporting, because we made all these plans. We're putting them on people. How do we know, what's happening? Again, it's a demo account, so we don't have a lot of data in it.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if you come in here to action plans, this will show you like you're not gonna see a whole lot because this is a demo account. But this will show you who all's active, who's engaged. If you look at all action plans, you can see like who's actually engaging with the action plan if you come in here. I'm trying to find anybody. So like this is a little bit. So this shows you like who all's active, who's engaged within, and if you want to like look at the definition, you can hover over like the question mark of what that action plan is, and you can actually click on this number to see like the 5 people who are active for that particular plan. And again, if you wanted to strategically reach out to them, or if you wanted to like save that particular list or whatever, you could if you wanted to do some sort of special type of outreach with those people.
Exactly. Yeah, but again, it goes back to what we said before, like maybe get a singular tag, like find all the different criteria you want, add a newsletter tag.
Yep.
And then that way you're just much more insured to not, touch that. But yeah, I think it's super important to look at the reporting, because people all the time ask me like, what's the magic, like you said, what's the magic action plan? What's everybody else doing? If it has good engagement and that engagement isn't stop or who is this?
Yep.
Then it's a good action plan. And if it's not, then you can tweak it. And you've also got, we're not going to go there, but you've also got reporting on each template. So if you really want to dig in and go, okay, the 3rd email is the one everybody unsubscribes from.
Yep.
You can do all that.
Yep, exactly. There is no magic bullet, just to put that out there.
Yeah, just saying. You should open with that every time.
Yeah, there is no magic bullet. It's there's no cookie cutter. I wish it was. It would make my job a heck of a lot easier.
Right. Just do this. Just take this action plan and fire it, Every time
Exactly.
you go to
Yeah.
nurture.
Yeah. Every team is completely different. Every like engagement. I mean, that's why we have marketing departments. That's a whole
Right.
career right there. It's completely different. So
Awesome. So I'm dropping a quick link in the chat. There are a couple of other questions. We did our best to answer all of them, but we do these office hours twice a month. I just dropped a playlist to all the office hours ever because we've got, you know, sessions on batch emails. We've got sessions on all of these things over the years, over a lot of time, different voices, different people. You know, so anyway, I dropped that also as a resource. You know, thank you guys for checking this out. DeForest, thank you. Great job running it all down. We'll do it again sometime.
we definitely will. Thanks, everyone.
For sure. And I want to mention too, somebody asked, these are always recorded. And if you're registered, which you are, if you're watching this right now, I always send the recording out day of to everybody that was registered. So you will get the recording. Thank you guys for being on. DeForest, you want to take us out with some words of encouragement?
Yeah, of course. I would say like if you just try to sell something to somebody today, you will automatically learn the system. I feel like the biggest thing that I find is people always feel overwhelmed learning something new.
Right.
So I would say take it one piece at a time. Don't try to learn everything at once, and you'll naturally be set up for success. So
Love it. That's great advice. You guys have a great day. Thank you, DeForest.
bye, everyone.